So I'm Jody Patterson. I was a journalist here in Victoria for a long time, and I'm a past executive director of Peers Victoria, and I'm a forever friend of Peers Victoria, forever friend of this issue, and I'm very happy to have a chance to be an activist on what I think is one of the most critical civil rights, workers' rights, equality issue in Canada right now. Okay, let's get started. So now that we've introduced ourselves, I was hoping that maybe Jillian, you could start us off with just telling us a bit about the state of the nation right now. Everybody is talking about the sex industry in Canada, about the mysterious Bill C-36. Can you tell us a bit about where we're at right now legally?
Okay. I'm touching myself. All right. So one of the things that, as an educator, that I like to pay due attention to is the vast experiences that people bring to any particular legal issue. So it is a privilege to be asked to do this small piece at the beginning, which is just to sort of give an idea of what the legal framework is. Because we're having a conversation about decriminalization, how is it that this is a criminal issue? So I'm going to start somewhere that some of you will already know and get us hopefully somewhere where we all can then be in the conversation. So the issue of the criminal law, due to the Constitution of Canada, falls under federal jurisdiction. So that means, and this is since the late 19th century, that it's the federal government that legislates with respect to criminal law matters. And that's not the same in all countries in the world. The United States, for example, the criminal law falls to states. So every state in the United States would have a different criminal law. So prostitution, broadly cast, has always fallen into the federal jurisdiction. So the federal government will legislate. And from the earliest criminal code, so in the late 19th century up until 1972, prostitution was a status offense. So that meant that being a common prostitute in a public place was in and of itself a crime. So that changed in 1972 to get us into the language that we sort of have now, the laws we have now around solicitation and communication. But when that happened in the early 1970s, across Canada, broad misunderstandings about what solicitation meant, so prosecuted and dealt with in vast ways. So then we had a case brought to the Supreme Court of Canada, which is the highest court in the country, in 1978 about what was this law all about? Was it constitutional? Was it in accordance with the Constitution? And the Supreme Court of Canada said for prostitution to be a crime, for solicitation to be a crime, it had to be pressing and persistent. So this language also made things very difficult, and for quite a while things were also playing out at different levels across the country. And you had municipalities and provinces not very happy with how the law was not being applied criminally. So then you started to have municipalities and provinces enacting laws to deal with what was identified as the objective, dealing with nuisance. And again, we had a dispute between the provinces and the federal government. Who could put a law in place? And again, we have a case go to the Supreme Court of Canada, and it reaffirms that no, the law in place around prostitution has to be a federal law. So then we get special parliamentary committees involved to try to define what it is that we're talking about, and we get the law that essentially is the law that we have here from 1985 that deals with these kind of questions of common body house, of communication, of living on the avails, etc. That case then, we also have a case then brought to say that these laws that have been put in place, they don't accord with the new Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, which came into force in 1982. And again, we have a case that goes all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada, this time as a reference. So the federal government, or all governments in Canada, have an ability to put a question straight to the court. So this is what they did in 1990. The Supreme Court of Canada was asked whether these new laws fit with the Constitution of Canada. And at the time, the court said yes. They didn't violate freedom of expression. They didn't violate the liberty rights of people working in the trade. So we have bits of flows and changes, but from 1990, these are the laws that exist in Canada. Then, about 7 years ago, we have this case that you'll know of that's called Bedford, and it originated in Ontario. Three sex workers brought a challenge to these very provisions that the Supreme Court of Canada had said don't offend our Constitution, making the argument that in fact they do. And those arguments were accepted at levels of court in Ontario. And then in June of last year, an argument was made to the Supreme Court of Canada that these three provisions, the provisions around body house laws, the provisions around living on the avails of prostitution, the provisions around communication, were unconstitutional. Again, on the question that it violated freedom of expression and also the security rights of people who were working in the trade. So a different kind of argument that had been placed years before. And in December of this past year, as many of you will know, as most of you will know, the Supreme Court of Canada found that in fact the Constitution is violated, and these provisions of the criminal code were unconstitutional, meaning no longer of any effect in Canada. And they looked at them, and some of you again will know this, on the body house law, they said having that law in place in Canada means that sex workers are more likely to seek outdoor work instead of indoor work, out calls instead of in calls. That puts them more at risk. That on the living on the avails, they said there's no distinction made in this law between exploitative relationships and supportive relationships. So again, it includes, it's much more broader than a law of this nature should be. And on the communication in a public place, they said this kind of law makes it very difficult for people working in the area to screen clients or to negotiate with clients, and that also puts them at risk. And so ultimately the Supreme Court of Canada said these laws heighten risks experienced by sex workers, and the laws were struck down. They also said the government of Canada has a year to do something about that. And this is something that happens in constitutional law all the time. There's the remedy that we would like when something is said to be unconstitutional doesn't always unfold. They say 1 year. That year would be December 2014. In the meantime, the federal government, over to you, dialogue between the courts and government that we're always worried about. The federal government responds with Bill C-36. Again, you'll have heard about this new law. And we'll talk more about what that law tells you, but essentially, in many, many ways, they have put back into the law the very things that the court said were unconstitutional. They've used, loosely speaking, what gets referred to as the Nordic model, which is criminalizing the purchase of sex. Sex work itself is still legal, but they've also brought in some more difficult questions around communication in public places, some difficult things around advertising. They have also essentially not responded to anything that the Supreme Court of Canada had to say about the security of the person, the impact that these laws had on sex workers, the fact the law itself made the practice more dangerous and more unsafe. And that leads us to where we are now, and the calls in response to this bill, which is supposed to be enacted by December and is working its way through Parliament and the Senate as we speak.
Thanks so much for a good summary, Jillian. So I'd like to throw this out to the larger group. What exactly do we mean by decriminalization? And I don't even just mean legally. I mean, like, what in a decriminalized country around this issue? What are the sort of the implications for everybody, sex workers and communities? What do we mean when we talk about decriminalization? I'd like to jump in on that one.
Catherine?
I don't want to be pushy. Just in our context, and it's hard to stay off the law, so I'll address that bit first. We repealed brothel keeping, which is your bawdy house legislation. We removed it off the statute books, so you can keep a brothel you can have 1,000, 2,000, we don't of course, but I'm just saying there aren't limitations in terms of managing your brothel, in terms of hiring sex workers. We have allowed, we've got rid of the procuring so that sex workers can be hired. Everyone knows what the deal is. You can talk frankly. When I was a dopey young know-it-all school teacher and went into a massage parlour because they'd advertised that you could make money, no training needed, I did not know that was code for commercial sex. So now you don't get people heading off ignorant like that. They are able to communicate and talk. Also, we repealed soliciting legislation, which is the act of asking for money in a public place in terms of the law. And so that's gone. And thank goodness for that, because we'd have police officers who would periodically have it put on them, I imagine, the scene at the police station, it's your turn, you can correct me. And it would be probably size, not my turn, surely. But, you know, they'd come in and pretend to be clients, and a week later we would be identified and told that we'd solicited, albeit in a darkened room at the back of a massage parlour, in a public place, and the penalty for that would be taken to court, convicted inevitably, and a fine and a stigma. You know, the fine would stay with you and so on. So that's gone. You can live on the earnings, so that means our landlords and, you know, for that matter, our partners, our children, etc., aren't vulnerable to being charged with living on our earnings. And, you know, like that could also happen. It was unlikely, but it could, you know, the fear of that could be planted. You're renting your flat, you're a bit dodgy as a landlord, we don't really like you, but you're renting this flat to some working girls, you know, we could charge you with living on the earnings, that kind of implication. So in our country, it means good law kicks in, the same law that applies to anyone in terms of employment, applies to people in the sex industry. All those things that were just beyond reach for us to use as instruments, to seek legal redress, to go to a disputes hearing, for goodness sakes, to go into an employment mediation. To just sit across a table and say, look, I don't think it's fair that you're withholding my money. I think I'm entitled as a sex worker to keep my money, and you, brothel operator, owe me more. To have that as a mediated hearing in a very normal setting with an adjudicator. To be able to, as a young sex worker has done recently, to say, look, the boss has spoken to me in a way that I object to. He's sexually harassing me. He's just speaking to me in a sexualised manner. Have I got rights? What can I do? And to be able to take that into a human rights review tribunal, to have it upheld, to have a ruling come through, to have an award settlement, 25,000 in this instance, where the sex worker was awarded 25,000, the brothel operator was instructed to have sexual harassment training. The sex worker wasn't unhappy with sex work, liked to work at that brothel, just didn't like the way he spoke to her. So lots of things in terms of decriminalisation, in terms of, you know, what becomes available for sex workers is stuff that you would take for granted in normal workplace settings. Stigma is another issue, and protection from discrimination. We don't have it. You know, we know that police officers are discriminated against. You know, it might be that people say, I don't want to share a house with you as a flatmate, we call them in our country, if you're a tax inspector, because you might cotton on to my dealings on Craigslist or whatever your equivalent is, eBay. So it's wide-reaching, decriminalisation, and that's probably enough.
Thanks, Catherine. Chris, what do you think it means for the buyer?
That's actually a great question. For the buyer, this is a really interesting thing. For buyers, no real aspect of the sex industry has ever been criminalized, except for communicating in a public place for the purposes of negotiating sexual services. But that doesn't mean that for buyers, the criminalized environment has had no effect. The criminalized environment that buyers have had to navigate through by virtue of sex workers being more likely to be targeted in the environment we've just come through, has created this atmosphere of, uncertainty and an atmosphere of mistrust at times. And so I can't speak necessarily to what a decriminalized space for the entire industry, whether that's necessarily better than other options that we should explore in terms of regulation, legalization, and getting straight what those differences are. But what I can say is it is a far cry better than the criminalized environment. And when I've looked at this from the vantage point and went out and spoken with people who purchase sexual services and asked them, okay, well, what does your interaction with sex workers currently look like in these environments where you go in and you don't know whether the place is going to be busted under body house rules, or where you don't know whether the person in the car is a undercover police officer waiting for you to arrest you, to entrap you, they often say. And I say, well, and their response to me is, what it does is it makes me not have any time to actually speak with and communicate with the person, with the sex worker. To not be able to communicate, what is it that I'm looking for? What is it that you're willing to provide? And can we come to some terms? Can we come to some agreement? Or do I need to go somewhere else? And what I've found is that in that space, conflict emerges because of the uncertainty. Short communication time leads to misunderstanding and conflict. But also, incredibly importantly, the rules of sexual safety don't always get observed in those types of environments. When you're rushed, you're worried about being arrested, you're worried about the place being busted, and not even just worried for themselves, as I said, because many clients I've talked to either know that what they're doing technically isn't against the law, or they operate under some sort of misconception that they could be arrested, but regardless, it rushes them, and that leads to some very big problems. And that actually leads us to what we're talking about when we talk about C36, where we say, now we're going to outrightly criminalize and target these individuals. So that's a conversation that I think we all need to have. What's going to be the effect of that?
Todd, what do you think? Not that. What's it going to be? Oh, you can talk about that too. In general, like here you are in Victoria. We're in this funny space somewhere, not decriminalized and yet not fully criminalized. What does it look like right here in Victoria?
Well, it's interesting in that even answering the question, I have to provide some context, because when it's the police, typically we're dealing with the street level, street trade. That's what most of the public see. That is what the calls into the police department are about, is the potential nuisance or the stigma around that. People don't want that in their neighborhood. So a little bit of history is that, so before the history is, let's acknowledge that we do live on the left coast. I believe through many of the studies that we are a little more liberal on this end. Take that as an insult. But just as far as even Victoria PD has never really made the body house or the escort agencies projects. It's always been about and this is in the 90s, this is about doing an undercover operation where we would either dress up our police women as sex workers, or we would have our men as the Johns and the clients. And we thought, wow, we're doing a great job cleaning up the streets and moving people along. And we quickly recognized that it was useless. I mean, we really, there was no impact. I don't think we were clear on what our goals were. So it's been interesting to me to see this evolution of policing, and what's sometimes spun the progressive evolution is resource limitations. And so as a police department, we're constantly looking at kind of working within, you know, smaller budgets and focusing on priority, and it's easy to start recognizing that the summary conviction offenses, the nuisance issues, the sex trade and the clients, and when you start getting into the consenting adults, how does that fit when there's sexual assaults going on, exploitation, youth being involved? It doesn't take much to realize that we're wasting our time worrying about the street level and having to focus on and getting more and more calls on the sexual offenders, the predators, the people who are exploiting those involved in the sex trade. So what happened naturally, thankfully, is that we've been asking ourselves, how do we, when I hear that small percentage of offenses are reported to police, that scares me. And myself and our team and our department have been looking at ways to, how do we get over all the stereotypes around police, the stereotypes around the sex trade? How do we start having conversations to build positive relationships so that we can hear when a worker has been offended against, violated, that we can, for one, let them know that we care, two, that we are interested in finding that person, that in the process, interested in protecting the worker, and that Crown, although we don't have reps from them here, Crown Council, we're getting a lot of support from our courts when we're able to work with the worker and the support agencies and able to get it to that point. We're actually able to hold offenders accountable. So it's been a really interesting 20 years, and now with the C-36 being proposed, it worries me that, and so I don't want to monopolize here, just a quick little point is, one thing that I see there's potential for is that every police department has discretion. They can choose how to enforce or not enforce these laws. So we can get into that about what happens if C-36 actually occurs, but there has been laws over the years, and certainly on the West Coast we've seen a little bit more about, no, we're not worrying about the way the criminal code speaks. We know that the way we're really going to engage and go after the people that are exploiting and are abusing, there's only one way, and that's through building up trust.
Thank you very much. Natasha?
I just want to make a comment, because here we're talking, before everything, we have to reflect on something. The sex industry is not only a woman, so we discuss about decriminalization, sex worker, including trans folks and also male. And also we have to understand the clients also. I had woman clients, so in clients including also women, but it's not like McKay say like this perverse or something like that. So we're gonna call also a woman perverse, like client perverse. So we have to make sure here it's not only about women or something like that, it's a community, and it's also LGBTQI community inside the sex industry, so it could be everybody. So just to make sure, I just wanted to clarify that it's a reflection, because when we're talking about decriminalization or trafficking or something like that, we always thinking about like woman at the beginning, but just to make sure we included like male, transgender people, also LGBTQ queer community are also inside of this amazing movement.
Well, I'm going to jump in. I used to be a criminal justice instructor, so I can't help myself. But also in the legislature, and talk about the criminal code. We've had a tradition we inherited from Britain, and that had some good things in it and some bad things in it. And I think most would agree the good things in it were we have a criminal code so that we can apply sanctions and rehabilitate people who deliberately inflict harm on others. And I think everybody here would agree that's a good thing. Our current government tends to forget the and rehabilitate part. They just like to inflict the punishment. And I could go on and on about that. The other part that was in the traditional British criminal code was to define the limits of what was acceptable social behavior. And we have been slowly but surely removing those parts from the criminal code. And so lots of things like homosexuality were beyond the pale, there was no victim here, but the British criminal code said this is illegal, this is criminalized. It was an attempt to stigmatize. So that happened to the LGBTQ community, it happened to sex workers, it happened to women who exercise their right to choice. And we've been slowly but surely removing those, if you like, and I am a unabashed pro-choice person, we're removing all of those things which tried to control things we saw as socially evil behavior, but weren't, in my mind, linked to any real harm. And so we've got some more work to do, and I see this as completing that transition away from using the criminal code for things it's not effective for, and I think also not appropriate for. Now, the problem we have, again, with this government, which claims to be a law and order government, and to me, if you're a law and order government, you would respect decisions of the courts. This government does not respect decisions of the court, and particularly not decisions of the Supreme Court. So what they do is they try to find their way to look like they're supporting the decision and then undo it. So with safe injection sites, the courts have said you have to allow safe injection sites because it's a question of health. Conservatives said, absolutely, we'll bring in a bill to allow it. And here are 26 conditions you have to meet before you can have a safe injection site. Literally A to Z. It was quite handy so we can make fun of them. How can anybody ever meet those conditions? They're trying to prevent safe injection sites. They're trying to skirt the court's decision. I believe that's what they're doing with C-36. The court said, really, we don't need criminal law around these things, and in fact, it inflicts harm, and the Conservatives have come back to say, yes, we accept that, and now they're busy in all these aspects of writing things back in. So it's disturbing to me. It's not respectful of the court decision. It's not respectful of the rights of everyone. And what it will lead to is a period of time when we'll have these new laws that everybody tries to cope with before sex workers can challenge them and have them thrown out by the courts again. And the last thing I'll say is, I know we like to believe that it's Parliament that brings us freedom, and as a member of Parliament, I'd love to think that was true. But all the progress we've ever made in LGBTQ rights and in sex workers' rights has been from those people standing up for their rights, both in court and in public, and demanding equal treatment in Canada, which, when you do, the Canadians will support.
Wow.
Please don't apologize for jumping in. This is about jumping in. We should all jump in wherever we feel like it. One of the things I'd love to hear from all of you, some of you, is how did you reach the decision about how you feel about the consensual adult sex work? I know that everybody comes to it differently, and what was it for you? Sarah?
Well, I guess I just kind of also building on what the previous question. I think for me, decriminalization, it means one less reason to arrest Indigenous women. We know that 41%, which is a huge number, 41% of federally sentenced women are Indigenous. And yet we have, of course, as we all know, many murdered and missing women. So obviously the legal system is not working for us. And I think it's important with those missing and murdered women to recognize over 1,000 of those that are documented are murders. So it's not that we don't know where these women are, that the vast majority have been killed. And so I think that for myself, you know, I've been talking about that issue along with sex work for a long time, and as that issue has come to national attention, there's been this distancing from sex work, from talking about sex workers' rights and safety. And again, I think it goes back to questions of morality. stereotypes about Indigenous women's sexuality and wanting to, which have been used to justify violence. So in wanting to address that stigma, people have pushed themselves away from sex workers, away from sex work issues. So the national research, for example, on missing and murdered women, said that sex work was not a factor in the majority of cases they looked at. So there's this, it's very complex, the relationship between violence and involvement in sex work. So it's for myself, seeing that the people that I know and have worked with who have been involved in sex work have just seen the stigma, especially within our own communities, increase as these debates have kind of heated up. And so I think that decriminalization again means, I think there could be maybe a ripple effect, but addressing some of that stigma so that people can, for example, access services without having to hide the fact that they're working in the sex trade, or being able to, I guess, just have it to be easier to talk about, being able to access help if they want it, for example. Also, I think a lot of services are currently contingent on wanting to exit, and exiting is not necessarily the goal for everybody, and it's also not necessarily realistic for everybody. Depending on what communities people live in, again, thinking about smaller communities where we don't really know much about what sex work looks like in those communities, or people might not even be calling it sex work, that there aren't a lot of options for how to make a living. So it's not that, I think that the goal is to increase choices that people have, and policing and more laws, I don't think are the way to do that. I think that putting resources into communities, building relationships, and again, being able to have people talk about their experience without that stigma or shame is really the way to do that. And I think we also need to think about how kind of the sex workers are often portrayed as victims, and there's this sort of savior complex that's quite familiar for Indigenous people, for a lot of other marginalized communities. And I would encourage you all to look at the Native Youth Sexual Health Network. Just to promote this, has a few statements that all Indigenous people, it's all written by Indigenous people in the sex trade, who are really calling for their voices to be heard. And I think that's then moving forward, assuming that this maybe happens, that decriminalization happens, it also opens up more opportunities for dialogue, as you're talking about the police building relationships with communities, that sex work organizations and Aboriginal communities also need to build those relationships. That there's a lot of work to be done, but that if people are afraid to access services or to come forward and say this has been my experience because of the stigma, then that breaks down those relationships. So really wanting to promote hearing from the voices of sex workers themselves, not just people who supposedly advocate on their behalf.
Anyone else want to?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in as a sex worker myself. Speaking to Chris and the lack of the opportunity to negotiate and the restriction that any further criminalization will put on both the buyer and the seller of sex, in my experience, it's all about building a relationship. It's all about care and providing a service that somebody is actually willing to pay money for. And I can only speak from the indoor perspective and the perspective of someone who came into the industry knowing that I valued myself and I valued my experience as a massage therapist, and that I could bring a lot to the industry and was therefore empowered to charge a lot. So there had to be this space where I could speak to my clients about who I was, what I was offering, what they could expect, how much money that would cost them, and develop that rapport as any healthcare professional would. And so I'll keep emphasizing this point, whereby I see this as a healthcare issue, and that the criminalization of such only increases this perception in the public's mind of this being a deviant thing, that human sexuality is actually something to be feared, something to be pushed away, something to not talk about, and that's just carried on down through the generations, which in my mind not only messes with the public's perception of sex workers and the consequences that sex workers and their clients have to live out as a result of that perception, but it also warps our perception about our inherent sexuality, our human sexuality. What is it about? How are we taking care of it? How are the educators in schools talking to their students about it? How are parents talking to their kids about it? How are healthcare professionals actually dealing with people's sexuality, in particular sexual dysfunction? So, as I say, I can only speak from this indoor privileged perspective, but I saw a lot of vulnerable clients. So for Peter McKay and Stephen Harper to call my clients perverts is just like, are you kidding me? These are human beings. They're vulnerable, they're seeking help. And my peers are pretty much the only professionals that are willing and able and, brave enough, because I'll tell you, this takes a hell of a lot of courage to step into this industry. I was absolutely terrified in the beginning because I didn't know how much support I would get and who these people were. I soon discovered that the people that came to me were more frightened than I was most often. And in speaking to Todd and other police officers who have come out to events along these lines, I've gleaned, okay, I'm not at risk here, really. Where I was at risk was the perception of family, friends, neighbors, school officials for my daughter. It was this public perception of, oh my God, she's either crazy or deranged or diseased, like there was something drastically wrong with me for choosing to take my skills as a massage therapist, someone who is comfortable with naked bodies, and apply it to a field that really needs help. So, yeah, in order to...
How did I come to this? I guess I'd say, as a gay man, I started from the perspective, people shouldn't tell me what to do with my body, so they shouldn't tell other people. Quite superficial, I'll say. And I think a lot of gay men are still there at the quite superficial level. I'll say that about my brothers. The second part was when I got appointed to the police board in Esquimalt, and I actually talked to police who were saying to us as board members, we have much better things to do than this. We have much more important things to do than harass sex workers. And I really heard that very first from on the beat police, saying I would really like to do more worthwhile work than this. But I don't think it actually came home to me, and this is where I'm going to give credit to peers, to when I sat down with peers and sat down and met sex workers and heard the real life situations of people and why people made the choices that they did, that I came to understand the dangers that we were creating by stigmatization and criminalization. And it was really through peers' work, and I credit Natasha, I credit the other sex workers who agreed to sit down with me as a member of parliament and tell me the truth about what was going on, and I needed to hear it.
I just want to have a comment because for Lisa about the clients or something like that. When I started working, of course, I had problem with child authority because I was like insane woman, and then I was telling them, I'm not, because they said, you selling your body, and I was like, no, I'm just using a part of my body to make money. So they were like, no. So that is the difference. So in my, because I was also not social worker, but worker around for a sex worker, and also I was like, and the girl was like, yeah, but when folks like industry, like for a sex worker industry, and they said, yeah, they're yelling some shitty thing, and I said, I'm always said, keep it on your mind, you're just using a part of your body to make money. Has with a hammer, or you're using a part of your body to make money. So it's a little bit different because you're not selling your head, you're using your head to be in safety and to be very clear of what you want and what you don't want it to do, or something like your rights. But you're using a part of your body to make money with. It's a difference between selling your body or use a part of your body.
Lisa and Natasha, you both sort of mentioned this. It's just a jumping in point on Bill C-36, which is based on the presumption that the vast majority of sex workers are exploited and vulnerable and want to be rescued, and the customers are predators and perverts. So what does you were talking about your personal experience. What do personal experience and research tell us about that depiction? Chris, maybe you can.
Yeah.
Sure. I think that that's actually a really interesting question in terms of like the whole notion of all clients are predators and perverts. It's a convenient notion, and as you were talking about this whole, who we can stigmatize, who is a worthy target, and as I hear stories, and over the past 20 years, and I hear from my friends in the LGBTQ community, and I hear from friends of mine down in the United States who are African American working for rights down there, and I hear about Aboriginal issues here, and I see all these groups struggling for acknowledgement and coming forward and say, okay, this is our story, and we want an equal platform. And you mentioned that the conservative government has kind of been forced in many ways to draw back on their persecution of these particular groups. But what I've seen is that they kind of relocated to other groups. There are groups that we can target that won't stand up. And then they use this notion of, well, they're all perverts, they're all violent, they're all horrible people. And people say, well, yes, because sex workers suffer. Sex workers are victims. We all know this, right? And so it ties into that logic. And then you tie it into these Hollywood depictions around human trafficking. And the reason I'm not saying that human trafficking doesn't exist, of course it does, but our exposure to it as a public is generally through mainstream media depictions of it. We don't generally see what human trafficking looks like. But we all have this vision in our mind, and it comes from these media depictions, and then you say, oh, well, the clients they're the ones they're fueling this trafficking. And so you get all of this bound up and say, well, is that true? And then as a researcher, that's one of the things that has always driven me. To what degree is this true? Where is the evidence? Where, do we not need to go out and explore what is happening before we draw these conclusions? And that's not to deny. And I'm not going to sit up here before anybody and have a conversation and say that, oh, all clients are wonderful people. I teach, and I teach hundreds of students a year. And I can honestly say to you, some of them are wonderful people, and some of them aren't. In any room, in any population, you're going to get good people and bad people. What comes out with this whole notion, we're talking about communicating and transparent communication. The longer you have to talk to somebody, the easier it is for you to say whether they're a horrible person or a good person. Right? It's just that simple to me. And so, same way with this whole notion of violence and exploitation. The longer that you have to interact with somebody and exchange and engage with them, and the more transparent it is, if they have to provide you their name, their credit card numbers, their phone numbers, and it's an equal exchange in that respect, the less likely it is that you're not going to be able to figure out, these are not the kind of people I want to be around. And it goes the same with clients. Clients equally can say, oh, I actually don't like this particular sex worker, and I don't think we're going to get along, and maybe I can go somewhere else. It goes both ways.
I'm going on comment today. But yeah, Chris is right. And on our research, one of the questions was who have more control, like clients or a sex worker? And I interviewed couple in Montreal, and they were like, of course, it's me. I have the control and not the clients. So the equal, like, everybody think, you know, the clients are more controlled than the sex worker, but and the stats, I don't have the stats on me, but it's possible to get the stats on our website.
I believe it was like 80% of sex workers felt that they...
Yeah, 80% of the sex worker felt like we have the all control of the situation, but to get this control, it has to be a negotiation and understanding of what they need exactly. So, yeah.
I just wanted to sort of build on what you were saying there, just in terms of refocusing the stigma, but in different ways, or repackaging the same thing in different ways, and in relation to trafficking, because I think that that's, so I started doing work around human trafficking with the Global Alliance Against Trafficking in Women in the late 90s, and we tried to have a kind of a first educational kind of training forum for police, border officials, government. There was really no much interest at that time in the issue, and there was not much mention of First Nations people being involved. It was more about cross-border trafficking. And since then, and especially because I have done work around sexual exploitation with youth around the province, and have seen that just sort of the Office to Combat Trafficking in Persons in BC was formed just before the Olympics happened. And there was kind of this hype that there was going to be a lot of increased trafficking, and especially First Nations girls and women, but other people, there's this increased demand. And we did some research, the Global Alliance Against Trafficking in Women Canada, interviewing people, and we did find there had been cases around migrant labor that we didn't really hear much about in the news, and those people were deported. But there were cases that really came forward around sex trafficking. So there's kind of this, trafficking does happen, but it's not necessarily where we think it's happening. But the kind of, what we see in the media is, again, you know, I think working with First Nations girls and women, we now see there's this, whereas before we would have talked about, for example, intergenerational involvement in sex work. And certainly poverty is a factor we can't ignore for a lot of people's involvement. Maybe if they had a choice, they would move out of street level and into another kind of sex work, even if they weren't leaving, for example. But that's being rebranded now as trafficking, so that people that are working together are, you know, there's been cases in Ontario where girls were charged themselves with trafficking. These are teenagers. So instead of, we're not really getting at the root causes again, but I think it's just to say that the law is being used to portray the same kind of victim, just in a different way, and not really getting at, certainly that there is victimization that does happen, like we said, but that criminalizing doesn't help to, I don't think, to prevent that kind of victimization. I think that especially for people who are involved in the sex trade, who are coming from a place of poverty, or, you know, have a lot of other factors that they might want support with, or want to access, you know, services for drug use, or for, you know, within First Nations communities, there is intergenerational abuse stemming from residential schools, but that's true of people working in all sectors. You know, whatever kind of work we go into, we have those histories that we're addressing. So I think that decriminalization makes it easier to get at those root issues, and I would be cautious then to think of how the rebranding as trafficking is just sort of replicating the same kind of logics.
I'd just like to say that decriminalisation raises expectations that things should be working and should be working well, and that's a good dynamic. And that, you know, generates a lot of positive relationships. So where's the police when I need them to solve a situation? And that kind of confidence comes, you know, from street-based sex workers standing there, copping rubbish being thrown at them. Where's the police? I'll call them. And, you know, that's a very positive outcome. It's a different kind of relationship. Or the client who phones up our organisation, which is a sex worker-led organisation, to say, look, I wasn't quite convinced the sex worker I saw that, who's from another country, was in such a good space. I don't know if she had her passport. She said the brothel operator was keeping it safe for her. So the expectation is, that someone can do something, and the confidence is there, and I can't stress that enough. So that's a reality in terms of decriminalised sex industry, where sex workers and clients and third parties all have a legitimacy.
I think there's also the, and I base this on your work, Chris, around the imbalance. Okay, so first off, that 80+% of the workers feel like they are empowered in their relationships with the clients, and 80% of the clients agree with that. The small percentage where there's someone abusing or taking advantage will also have less power when I think they take advantage of the situation where the worker feels like they can't call the police, that they're doing something wrong. As soon as that's off the table, then again, the power, even for those people who want to abuse and exploit, is taken away from them. Obviously a powerful, positive thing.
Jillian, did you?
Yeah, I think my point has been eloquently made. But it's just that in a decriminalized world where we can actually focus on things like working conditions and safety the way that they have in New Zealand, then the places where there is exploitation or clients who are perverse, the criminal law can be engaged in the way it's intended to be, which is to go after those particular situations. And then in that kind of working environment, the other systemic issues like you raised of poverty, we can also be thinking about those kinds of questions as well, and how benefits are provided, how licensing and regulations occur for people who are trying to have a better work environment where they could bring something to a human rights commission. It's just an extraordinary thing to think about in this context. But then you're going to have real meaningful change.
And just to further that one step beyond, my vision is actually for a school, and just in the last few years I've heard like, you want to train sex workers to be sex workers. Well, why not?
And if I could just add one thing to this that I think is really important to get across is nobody's talking about decriminalizing rape or murder or robbery, right? Nobody's talking about decriminalizing human trafficking. What we're talking about is decriminalizing consensual services between adults, an agreement for the exchange of services, so that we can actually operate in an environment where we can detect robbery, rape, murder, and trafficking.
So, I don't know if everybody here knows what the sex industry looks like in Canada, but it's invisible really, other than that tiny piece that's on the outdoors, and it's usually quite ridiculous media portrayals. What does the sex industry actually look like? What does it look like here? What does it look like in New Zealand? What do people, if we could just pull back that veil of invisibility, what would we see right here in our town, for instance?
Well, one thing that Catherine was saying was, it's not the gazillion-dollar industry that it's portrayed to be. Like, I did go into it because of financial need, and yes, I could have done something else, but as a registered massage therapist, I earned a certain amount of money, and I needed to make a certain amount of money to keep that life going. But I'll tell you, like in the first 3 months of trying to start and run a business, it was next to impossible. I was trying to work out of Vancouver in order to keep my personal life here separate from a business life that I hope to create. So that didn't work, because in this industry, the clients phone up and they want an appointment that day, if not within the hour or within a couple of hours. yes, I earned a tremendous amount of money. I charged $300 an hour in the beginning. Now the economy has changed somewhat, and I can charge $250 an hour, and even that's a stretch. So the money that I'm charging limits the number of clients that are able to come to me. And just the number of clients that I'm able to see in a day, you know, I don't realistically want to share that kind of energy and that kind of intimacy with more than one person, ideally, a day, because it's that big a stretch for me. I have done it where I've seen 4 clients in a day, and that's a lot of energy to put out. So, and women who see more than that in a day, I don't know how they do it. I have the highest respect and regard for them to be able to put themselves out in that way so many times per day. And they're, you know, I really want us to get past this squeamishness of, oh my God, like sex with 4 people in a day. Like, yeah, and even I had to overcome that. It's significant, it's huge, because sexuality is huge and magical and incredible, and it's like such a deep, deep power on this earth, on many levels, not just esoteric levels, which is where I like to speak from. So, yeah, you know, just all those factors that it's not the pretty woman scenario that we're led to believe, or the drug addicted person standing on the street. That, you know, there are that element of it, but it's so much more complex than that.
Yeah, the sex industry, it's like a casino. Sometimes you can win like the big prize, and someday you're gonna lose everything. It's like ching-ching all the time. So it's unstable, first of all, except you have some regular clients, of course, but it's unstable days. So you have to figure it out. Also, if you are working for an agency, you have to think about your driver, you have to think about your receptionist. It's a lot of fee. Your mother or father or whatever, you have a daycare to take care. If you're working during the night, you have to get a babysitter during the night, and you have like a bunch. You have to, if you travel, like I was traveling, so I have to think about my hotel, my food, my babysitting, my driver, my agency, like an example, to be booked, like example Montreal to Niagara Falls. So I was passing by a booking agency, so I have to pay them to find a club or whatever, or a massage park, whatever. So this is a part of it, the fee, before you're making money inside the sex industry. So it's something we have to think about. It's like, it's not like Pretty Woman and then ching ching, every day you're going to shop with your clients. It's not like that. It's like a regular job, it's a regular fee. It's like a regular, for me it's like a regular job, like like you compare to, it's especially you, it's a spécialisation de son, like yeah, you like you're working with your body, whatever.
Todd, what do you know about what do you know about what the industry looks like?
Nothing, I don't know. But, you know, it's obviously complex, and there's different extremes and a huge scale, and, you know, what I see is desperate. It's survival, it's dangerous, it's risky, it's exploited, it's addicted, it's sad. We don't have anyone representing that up here right now, but it's part of it. And that's why we're so challenged making laws around it or regulating it, because there's this huge extreme. There's survival sex trade workers on the street, in the dark, trying to do whatever they have to get their next fix. And then there's people working indoors who have it together, there's no mental health issues, they're able to, you know, I'm not saying that there isn't, but, you know, there's the other extreme of doing it well. And so, how do we regulate that? Well, I think we have to be really creative. It has to be really local. It has to be customized to a city, to a geography, to a community. So that's, you know, I see we can't talk about the sex industry without talking about that small percentage, because that's what the window is on it for so many people. It may be a very naive glimpse, or, you know, not an accurate glimpse of what the industry is, but it is a piece of it.
Yeah, I think that is the piece is, unfortunately, that is the only piece that people see, and therefore what are they going to do? They're going to conclude that that's the whole industry, and you're right, that there's this piece that really needs a lot of services and support. Sarah, you were there?
I just wanted to caution, I think we need to be careful not to stigmatize those people, though, by portraying them as desperate. And, you know, I do think that there's a huge variation, as you're saying, just as there are in lots of other industries, as other kinds of work. But there's, so often that kind of portrayal is used to say why we need to rescue all of those poor people. And so we don't want to just say indoor is legal and street level, for example, is still desperate and we should stay away from that. I think that there are lots of levels of choice. So, you know, often people say, well, they would never choose that life, or they would never, there's lots of things people don't choose. There's lots of, you know, people don't necessarily choose to live in poverty or to not have a home, but today, right now, if someone's saying I'm going out to work, you know, and yeah, it's to get my next fix, but that's what I'm doing. How can decriminalization, I think, and creating more support services and greater understanding and greater relationships and you know, seeing that those are our family members, those are members of our community too. How can they do that in the safest way possible, that they feel they can access help if they need it, if somebody does rob them or if they get beaten up or whatever, that they can access health care services, for example. So I think that talking about, and, you know, it might also be that, I mean, there's already people in street level sex work who are, there's lots of safety measures people put in place by working in pairs, spotting, you know, there's bad date sheets already that happen. And I mean, Piers is a huge resource where I remember coming there one morning before it opened for something, and somebody had been sleeping on the stairs and being there all night, and she'd had a bad experience and came there. So, you know, there's already, if we could have more places like that people feel they can go when they do need help. But the reality is that that there's lots of reasons why people end up choosing to do sex work, and for some people, if they had more choices, maybe they would do different kinds of work, or maybe they would move indoors or whatever, right? So I think that being able to remove the stigma from all levels is really important, so that we don't just, I guess, replicate that for certain sectors, you know.
I heard what you say, and I was doing some education with the police in Quebec. In your language, I totally heard, but the problem, first of all, in the streets, and I don't want to, because correct me if my English is wrong, but there's a drug issue problem first, and the services for drug addict, it's not well. It's not well. And for me, for my part, to interview some sex worker in the street, even male or female or whatever, they said, okay, give us some clean space, give us some space to sleep, rest in the night. And the problem in the street, it's pretty easy to do sorry, I'm gonna be rude, but a blowjob for $20 and then get my rock and then, you know, so it's easy for them. And they still said to me, it's a choice, because I'm a drug addict. Like I give you an example. I don't want to generalize, but I give you like some examples. So I'm a drug addict. It's an easy way for me to find my drug or something like that. So in Montreal now they have it's kind of housing for sex worker. It's a good thing, like a co-op. You can bring your clients there, you know. It's a safety environment, so it's a safety. So it's not, I think it's a little bit judgmental to say there's poor, vulnerable people because they don't have the needs they deserve in the street, and they have to have more like resources around that, but they are not poor. Yes, they are like vulnerable, but they need more support of our community.
I agree.
That's it.
Sex work might be the stability element too, in terms of, you know, if you conflate, you know, poverty and the desperation and so on, sex work might be the stabiliser in that kind of life, and it might be the thing that you think, okay, I've got control of this, you know, I can do this. I know we work a lot with street-based sex workers who after decriminalisation, you know, that sense of being, that sense of being a part of, was really pronounced. You know, I'm not wanting to romanticise hardship, but I'm just saying it came as a very strong symptom. Their names were removed from a police database where they'd been monitored. I don't know if this happens here, but sex workers prior to the law change had had their names on a police database because the police were protecting them if they were to go missing. It was this kind of imposition, you know, it was put on them. They didn't have any discussion as to whether they wanted their name on a database to be monitored as potential victims of violence or potential perpetrators of a crime. Does that happen here? I'm not sure. Do you have a database?
It's the conversations that we've had with peers around working with their clients, working with the sex trade and saying, what do you think about this? Is there room for conversation about this? When assaults do occur, when homicides do occur, I'd really like to be able to, for one, we're talking about setting up a missing persons, better reporting of sex trade workers going missing. We've talked about photography, but in a consensual piece. So it's out there for being thoughtful and respectful in how we best investigate crimes when crimes do occur.
Registration schemes are usually imposed on sex workers, and you know, it starts with good intentions like respectful and, you know, to protect and so on, and that may well be you know, how things begin, but then it becomes you must. Yeah. And then your name is on a database, and you know, maybe you want to go and have a weekend in Seattle, or you know, and you can't get across that border because you're on your database. So I know that's a digression, but it's you know, starting from the point of sex work might be the one stabilising good thing that's happening for you.
Well, also the federal government, in terms of violence with First Nations women, said one of their responses is to create a DNA database so that if people die, they can identify them. So that's
Every married woman will be on it.
yeah.
Well, I remember 2 police officers, I can't remember their name, but I bet you know the project, and they were trying to do a database kind of a thing, and they were like, they had the best of intentions. They were really just trying to be really helpful. But then we got into a conversation with, I was at Piers at the time, and about how that would work and whether people would be willing. And then I said, so how do people get their name out of that database? Let's say they come out of the work, because most people do, right? They come out of the work. When they come out of the work, it's been, you know, how do they now get out of that database? There was no mechanism for that. So once they were in, they were in. And when you think about the implications on border crossings, but also on the stigma, right? Like until the stigma's gone, a database that says once upon a time you worked as a sex worker, and here's the photo and the information, you know, like that could be devastating to somebody. And that was one of the key pieces, was even in the best of intentions and how you might, there's implications there that are sort of beyond the control of everybody in the moment trying to do something, trying to do the right thing. I'm thinking maybe we should get some public microphones going now if people are, can I have my microphone helpers? Well, while we're doing this, so I'm hoping other people have questions or things to add, but one of the things that I've always wondered, in Canada's a very tolerant country. It's been very open-minded about so many things. It's accepted, you know, really proud of how we've been on LGBT and all of those issues, but what is it about this one? I like, why do people feel so strongly resistant to thinking about sex workers as people who might have actually made a choice to do that work. What do you think that is?
In my experience, it is just this reluctance to think about sex in general, and then to think about being with a stranger sexually and receiving money for that. And as I said before, that was a hurdle that I had to get over. The very first night that I went out, I too was under the impression that because I didn't know anything about the industry, and I had phoned a few escorting agencies, and they had said, well, you know what you're doing, right? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, that's right. You go out to the casino and you entertain your clients, you maybe go for dinner. So the first night I didn't even take any condoms. Like, I was that naive. Luckily, I had two very generous and beautiful, wonderful people that I was working with, and we negotiated around that. But I came out of the second appointment and was asked if I wanted to do a third appointment, and I literally felt like throwing up. So it was like, yes, I had to get my head and my gut and my heart wrapped around all the issues that go along with sharing such an intimate act with a complete stranger for money. And so I think, you know, like Chris was saying, we need to have these conversations about what this industry is all about what our human sexuality is all about, and what is that squeamishness and that distaste that goes along with that, that then is perpetuated into not only is sex work bad and disgusting, but those that perform it are bad and disgusting, and we don't want to have anything to do with them because they're diseased or, like I said, deranged. And we dehumanize them through that, and we dehumanize them through bills like Bill C-36 and calling people perverts and, you know, considering this a deviant activity. We just need to get real that, hey, these are bodies, this is sexuality, this is, again, in my mind, a healthcare issue.
I think that it would be, oh, sorry. I was going to just say, I think it would be, like, to combat that, I would love to see more people publicly supporting decriminalization who don't, you know, just the average person, because we do see that the anti-sex work voices are very loud right now, and are not just loud and getting into Parliament and things like that, or getting into the Senate hearings, but are attacking sex workers online. There are some sex workers that I know and I'm friends with who, you know, are sending out emails asking for support from their friends and peers because of how much it impacts them, like how traumatic it is, and people yelling at them in person when they're at, you know, in Ottawa going to testify, as well as being shut down and silenced by people who, at the hearings, who clearly support the bill, so they want to, you know, get your 5 minutes over with and then run to somebody else. So there is really, you know, people in positions of power, and also people who are just really loud and angry who are trying to silence their voices. So I think the more of us who can speak out and say, you know, sex workers' voices should be heard and we support that, just the average person would maybe help to combat some of that shame and the stigma.
Can I just say too that one thing that's really amazing about the Bedford decision, the one that was at the Supreme Court of Canada last year, was how much the voices of people working in the trade were at the heart of that decision. And that doesn't happen very much in law. Working as a lawyer and someone who teaches people who become lawyers, getting people's voices into those stories is very tricky unless you're a lone accused, and even still. And something about the work that Peers does, so this is back to your other question, and also organizations like Pivot Legal in Vancouver who have really talked to people and collected stories. And for those of us who sit in very different places with this particular question, self-education is really, really critical, and there's lots of places that you can do it. Coming to a panel is a great start, but the diversity of voices are huge here. And the more that the voices of people who are actually directly impacted by all of this, either decriminalization or further criminalization, they need to be elevated. So we all have a responsibility to be part of making that happen.
Can I add 2 minutes? It's okay.
I know it's really, okay, so about, we need more support. We have a very bad experience, Chris and I, and also Rachel. We testified in Ottawa this summer, and they, give you an example, what is her name again? Yeah, so she said to me, I was a sitcom hooker, so in front of everybody. I was like, oh, very shocked, because I was telling her I was accepting, that was my choice, and I was thinking about, I was talking about my real life and my clients, and it was horrible. So the movement is very strong, even in international movement. With Catherine, we were in June for the Supreme Court last year, and the movement it's very strong movement, but we need to be more. We need to be heard more loudly, because it's very, very hard to fight with someone trying just to push you all the time on the ground, and it's hard when it's the government, or they don't want to hear the voice of sex worker, because it's funny, because everybody's talking about decriminalization and sex work, and but they don't have any sex work experience, real sex work experience, because sex works mean this and that, but there's any sex worker involved on any discussion in Canada. So that's the model, the decriminalization, the New Zealand model. It's amazing, because they can sit with the government, the social worker, the organization buying for sex worker, and of course the concerned people, sex worker. So I think here we have to learn more about the complicity of each part.
Thank you for your patience. Do you have a...
I'm Andrew Deckerman. I'm a volunteer at Vancouver Island, and it seems to me it's easier apparently for governments to deal with moral issues in a very legal sense and a judgmental sense, rather than to deal with the more important core issues that affect our country in general. It's probably not only our country, it's probably in many countries. But so many of you mentioned, I spoke to this person, I talked with that person, and I always say in the work that we do at AVI, it's the intersection of poverty, abuse, homelessness, mental health and addiction challenges, discrimination, and despair. And my life is not that life, thank goodness, I'm lucky. But taking the time to speak with the people that my agency works with and on behalf of is such a wonderful education, because at one level we have something in common. We are all human beings. And it offends me that people will more easily say hello to my dog than say hello to somebody panhandling on the pavements. Mm-hmm. And every conversation I have with an infected drug addict increases the openness of my heart and the understanding of why they are in that position. And it's the same thing about sex work. If everybody in this country took the time to speak with a sex worker, this issue would be dealt with very differently, I feel, because again, we are all people, and we are just struggling to get by.
Thank you.
So we have, there was a question up here. Good, thank you. So is that all right if I take a turn to read one of these? Okay, so this is something that somebody wrote in and put in here for the panel. It says, no one has mentioned the pimp word or the effects of what decriminalization would mean to that culture, and what if women choose pimps?
Okay, so the question is about, it's true, we haven't talked about that piece, what about so pimps. Let's just throw that word out there. You guys answer, you're the smart ones. What do we know about pimps? What do we know about why they exist? What do we know about even the word sounds kind of nasty, you know?
I can answer this question because I was most of the time I was in the club. I was doing more than a dance, so I was doing anyway something with the hands. So yes, it's true. There's a pimp somewhere. Most of the time, it's more. I'm probably gonna shock you right now, but most of the time it's the girl's choice for a boyfriend, and they know this guy have more than one girlfriend. So usually it's like that. In the streets, they are talking about, yeah, we have like the images, and I make a mistake because I made a documentary in Montreal, and with the producer cut all of my thing, and I was like, it doesn't exist, like the syringe and the fear, and we're talking about movie, like 70s movie, and they cut it, and it looks like I was like, you know, like shut my eyes about pimp. But usually in the street, it's not a pimp, because I'm sorry, if you're working for less money, like 30 bucks, are you gonna give like half of your salary to your pimp in the street, or are you gonna go get your whatever, your beer, your food, or whatever, you know? It's ridiculous. So in the street, most of the time, we are talking. I don't want you to get the images of the street and alcohol and drugs or something like that. But for some drug addiction problem, they're gonna do the clients and go see the pusher. But the pusher, it's considered as a pimp, you know. So there's a different pimp existed, but it's more. The partner, the abusive partner. But I'm sorry, but the girls who's working at McDonald's and his boyfriend doesn't work and take the money of, like take a salary, for me, it's considered a pimp. You know, it's considered like there's no freaking difference. It's more abusive people, take advantage of people, and that's it. Because, or most of the women choose this type of, like, in you know, but abusing situation, it's going to be always an abusing situation. Doesn't matter if it's pimp, partner, or parents, or whatever, it's abusing situation. It's not, I don't know if I'm clear.
Yeah, I understand. I'd like to hear from Todd and Catherine on this one too.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. And you know, like people do have relationships, and they are very close relationships. We have people who work on the street who would say that they're mostly independent, and they are. And they're independent when they work in the brothels. The idea of someone is, you know, who's going to have them under their thumb and have a group of sex workers that they're running doesn't really exist. We have one city that's been affected badly by an earthquake, and we've had some young guys appear and say, "Oh, we're from this gang, and we're going to control people." And you know, there was a bit of standover tactics where they were saying, "Give us your money," and there was a bit of violence. The police came in and said, "Look, we'll sort this out," and they're a bigger gang. So it's kind of a romanticised idea, and I think you would find most sex workers in New Zealand would say that they're working for themselves, independent, whether they have a manager or an operator of a brothel or not.
Stereotypes abound. The pimps, my experience is mostly for when women choose not to be abused by a pimp or a boyfriend. They've got options, and we have options as police to investigate and charge under other statutes under the criminal code. We don't need the criminalization of prostitution to go after these people. As mentioned, sometimes it's abusive, sometimes there's harassment, sometimes there's physical abuse, all sorts, and there's other criminal code offenses that we can investigate that with. And we do experience the odd situation where someone is an abusive, aggressive pimp who has many girlfriends, who is exploiting young women and young women under 18 and also adult women. There are those experiences, and that is occurring. Again, it's a small percentage of the time, but when it comes up, we can't say that's not happening. When we have women approaching us, typically it's women, will approach us and say, help me, this is what's happening, and it's happening to this woman and this woman, then we feel confident about addressing that because other statutes.
We want decriminalization, of course, but we don't want decriminalization of coercion, coercion pimp, So there's a difference between a violent person and then, because right now the old law, like the unconstitutional law, they were criminalized even receptionist or driver or boss of agency or whatever. So, and those people are considered as a pimp. So the Supreme Court decided this part of the law is unconstitutional, but we never ask to decriminalize some coercion activities. So it has to be very clear about that.
Do we have another, I also know there's research too around third party. I don't know if anyone in the audience can speak to that. Not that I'm making you speak to third party already.
No, I have a question up there. I would like to know when it was changed from living off the avails to living on the avails. And why was that law changed? Why was the wording in that changed? And for what reason? Why is it off? Why was off taken out and put into on? Living off the avails. It used to be forever. And then all of a sudden I heard living on the avails. So what does that mean? Why was the wording of the charge changed?
Well, that's historical, because they're not using that language right now.
I know.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm not sure.
So it's interesting that a part of the prostitution legality laws, the wording was changed, but there was no talk about it. I don't remember or recall anywhere that this law, the wording was going to be changed. And so I'm really curious, and I'm still looking for the answer because I've been on this quest for a while. So if anybody knows why the wording in this law was changed, who changed it, why they changed it, and what does it mean? Why?
Yeah, I'm on it. I can answer those kind of questions, but not right now. But now C36 has changed it to material benefits, right? So whatever language is gone entirely, right? But in my notes it says living off the avails, and I've crossed off and written on. So, right? So I'm on it for you. We'll chat after class.
Hi, my name's, can you hear me? Yeah. My name's Heather Hunter, and I'm very proud to say that I am Lisa Ordell's mom. And the reason I came today is my ongoing education in what this is all about. Because when I first heard from Lisa that she had entered the sex worker trade, I didn't know anything about about the sex worker trade? Absolutely nothing. I was a probation officer for a number of years, so I knew, clients that came through, and that was street worker based. So through Lisa's willingness to share and my willingness to listen and continuing willingness to listen, I've been watching some of the panel stuff on Bill C-36. I'm becoming educated more and more, and today has been another example of that. And that's, like, I'm not sure why you all are here. That was sort of the question I had in my mind. Like, who's in the audience? What has brought you here? And what is it for us to do? Like, we still in our family are not talking openly about Lisa being in the sex trade. We haven't found, Lisa and I haven't even really talked about this. Like, when do we do that, and how do we do that, and oh my God, should we ever do that? You know, like, and we're just ordinary folks, ordinary folks. So I'm left with the query of what is it that we do so people are better taken care of? As you said, we're all human beings. So some of us parents, some of us, yeah. So thank you.
I just want to say something in response to that. You say you're watching what's been going on with the hearings in the House of Commons. I just want to point out to people that Conservatives have stacked these hearings full of people who have tragic personal stories, which are tragic personal stories, most of which have nothing at all to do with the laws that have been declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And it's disturbing to me that they've done this knowingly. And one of the Conservatives said to me, and I'm just so thrilled you're here, said to me, so do you know any mother who would admit their daughter's a prostitute? And I promise you, not using your name, I will be going back to that meeting on Monday to say, I just met one. So thank you. And maybe I'll just add to that. What can you do? Like, that's something that we always want to talk about. One of the things the Conservatives always say to me is, no one who supports these positions ever contacts me, right? And I think there's some truth in that. I think as Canadians, you will all email me and tell me you love my position, right? What you really need to do is email the Prime Minister and copy me saying you hate his. And other MPs, now we're in a kind of conservative-free zone here, so on this topic, you've got supported MPs. I need that information, that you're supportive, because again, when I stand up in the House, Conservatives are often saying to me, well, if you actually talk to your constituents once in a while, right, you know there's no support for this. And I work really hard at being here and talking to my constituents so that I can say to them, no, I do hear from them, and you're quite wrong. So if you think emailing politicians doesn't count, it does. No, I don't personally read every one that I get, because I get 2,000 to 3,000 a week. My staff does, we count them, they bring me the best ones, I use them in the House of Commons. The other side does the same thing. And if they don't hear from people criticizing them, they think what they're doing is just fine. So I really encourage all of you to use the power you have as a citizen to email, or write an old-fashioned letter. Those are actually even more powerful. You don't have to put a stamp on it, and send it to them saying that you really don't like what they're doing. And it is helpful.
The old squeaky wheel.
Yes.
I just think, just in addition to, like, whatever happens with the legislation, and we're all hoping for the same outcome, but I think that that at a more local level, and just in our homes and relationships with our friends, with our people who live around us, that address whether the law changes or not, stigma is still there. And so I think that, like you're saying, I have. And talking about kind of the needing to wrap your head around things, that we live in a society where we are bombarded with negative images all the time. Either it's like Julia Roberts or it's the down and out kind of story. So to just make it normal for, I've been talking about this for over 15 years, and have friends who are doing sex work and all kinds of things, and still when people are saying, I was just talking to someone in Toronto the other day who was had been doing her master's, and she's saying, yeah, I'm really enjoying now, I'm just doing more, decided to do some dominatrix work, and it's really great. And, you know, I'm not taking any classes right now. And I kind of noticed my like, oh, that's great. And like, I thought that it was great she could tell me that. I didn't feel ashamed, and we just kept going on with our conversation. There was no, you know, that takes people knowing that you support them and that you're not going to judge them for that. So the more we can do that with each other, then that will, whether the law changes or not, help to change that stigma.
Oh, there you are, sorry. I guess your standing up wasn't good enough this time.
Hold the mic closer, please.
Hold it closer?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
And maybe to you too, Randy, but first of all, I want to think that nearly everybody in this room is in favor of full decriminalization of those who are selling themselves or parts of their bodies. That doesn't mean that I think the issue is as simple as you're presenting it today, and I'm really disappointed that there hasn't been, although there's lots of mention of the complexities of the issue here, I haven't heard them discussed at all. I mean, I'm impressed to meet Dr. Hunt and to see some of you in person, but I don't understand why there's no one representing the position of NWAC, the Native Women's Organization, or WASI, the Indigenous Workers Against the Sex Industry, or why we're not looking at a position taken by a lot of thoughtful people, not necessarily the one any of you are going to agree with, but which says that maybe sometimes some parts of some legislation, and I've never said this about the Harper government before and won't again, you know, needs to be taken a little bit seriously. So I need to say to my city council, or to peers, or to my police force, or to Randy Garrison, like I've been voting New Democrat for a long, long time, I don't agree with you. I don't know if I need to send you an email saying that. I certainly think I'll do it by sending money to organizations who may not. I want to say to my police force, you at least used the word desperate at one moment, and I value that highly. It doesn't seem to me that anyone else in this room has looked at the complexity of the issue. There's been almost a downplaying of the multi-billion-dollar sex industry in this community and in this country and globally. No one's saying follow the money, and no one is, as far as I can tell, you're kind of denying that trafficking exists. There's a large trafficking problem in New Zealand with Asian women brought in. There's a huge issue in Vancouver. A whole lot of the inside workers.
Where's your evidence? Because
I'll be happy to
because there
get that, but
isn't
let
any
me
evidence.
finish if I could, because I
know,
listened
but
respectfully
honestly,
quite a
if
long
you're going to
time.
tell lies,
All right, I'm happy to have it on record that she doesn't agree that there's an industry that involves trafficking in New Zealand, but let's stick to Canada. We know that Aboriginal women are trafficked. We know that many of the inside workers in the Vancouver brothels, legal or otherwise, are Asian. I get the case that some of you are making about this being a choice and that the people involved are consenting adults. I don't think that disproportionate numbers of Aboriginal and Asian women choose the sex trade over the rest of us. I think there are a whole lot of other factors that ought to be taken into account in that debate. I know I'm making a speech and I'll stop now, but I do want to go on record for those of you who are in public positions of influence. This is not something that every Victorian thinks is okay, this minimizing of what's happening to women and especially children, and in many cases male children as well as men or transsexuals. This is not transgendered. This is not as simple as you're making it today. Of course I believe that fully we should decriminalize the selling of our bodies or parts of them. I do not think that I do share the perception that there's no role for legislation related to the buying and selling of other people's bodies. And I think that we'll stay away from the morality question if you want. It's not an industry I'm going to support.
Excuse me,
And I don't really want to debate, but I'm happy to listen to somebody else now.
I just want to repeat myself. I'm not selling my body. I'm using a part of my body to make money.
Thank you very much. We always want to be polite and respectful and have all opinions. I certainly haven't heard people minimizing trafficking here or denying that it exists, but and the reason why there isn't representatives of other perspectives is because today was a day about decriminalization. It isn't about weighing the various viewpoints. This is an issue that, as you, I'm sure all of us know, is very hot. Like the people tend to feel one extreme or the other, and it's very hard to have a balanced panel where we would have sort of, without getting all heated up, and that was never the intent. But I'll let the panel talk about that, about whether they feel they were minimizing.
I just want to say one thing, which is that the Native Women's Association is standing with the federal government, not with Indigenous people in the sex trade. They're actively ignoring those people. So for me, that's NWAC is funded by the federal government. They're siding with the federal government, and they're taking a stand with other anti-sex work organizations, which I, as an Indigenous person who's been working on violence and trafficking and sexual exploitation for over 15 years, think is appalling. Because that stance is silencing sex workers themselves who might otherwise turn to NWAC. NWAC is not a voice for sex workers. It's not something they've done work on. And in their research, they found it's not related to violence somehow. So we know that these are complex issues, but NWAC is certainly not taking a stance with sex workers. And that's, I think, where we need to think about who is this in the name of then? Who are we trying to, who are these laws supposedly for,
I forgot to mention that I've been in school for the past 7 years. I wrote my undergrad honors thesis for sociology. It was an autoethnographic exploration of my journey into sex work, and I also compared that with data from Dr. Cecilia Benoit, who's done years and years and continues to do research on the sex work industry. Chris is a part of that, Todd's a part of that. I'm sorry that you feel that we've tried to simplify or only cover one piece of it. Again, I'll say, the sex worker is a very, very resourceful person, a very strong, brave, intelligent, organized, perceptive, intuitive person. You cannot do this work without those qualities intact and inside yourself. I visited the street once out of complete desperation, and I also needed to know what it would be like. I had to have a few shots of tequila, smoke some pot, walk around downtown before I actually got to the Rock Bay area. I was horribly uncomfortable just with the conditions. It was a little chilly. I stood on that sidewalk for about 3 or 4 hours. I met some of the sex workers out there. Again, hey, hi, how you doing? I didn't realize you were working tonight. Oh, haven't I met you before? Friendly. They're, maybe not necessarily completely stable and balanced, but stable and balanced enough to be there. And I'm not minimizing or trying to deny that, yes, there are some desperate people. There are some survival-based people out there. But like Natasha was saying, it's like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do this and I'm going to get what I need in order to take care of my life. And that was the story throughout all the data that Cecilia had collected. And that data was mostly on the outdoor survival sex worker, not the indoor worker. So yeah, really unfortunate that you feel that this is us trying to gloss it over or minimize it. My purpose in being here is to educate people as to the resourcefulness and resiliency of those that choose to go into sex work and to make something of their lives, however they choose to do that. In terms of the pimp thing, like Natasha was saying, it's a boyfriend thing usually. I've never actually encountered a pimp myself. I have encountered a survival worker who had this kind of abusive boyfriend as well, but never this mythology that is attached to how we perceive sex work. Yeah, oh, I've just got so much to say, and I can't keep all the thoughts in there. Yeah, so I'll just leave it at that for now if it comes back, because I know I've got a couple more things in there, but they're just jammed right now.
I just wanted to quickly say that there have been concerted efforts by our Ministry of Immigration to identify victims of trafficking. There has been extensive research carried out. There are sex workers who migrate to work in New Zealand who are from Southeast Asian countries. There have not been any victims of trafficking identified. So that is a lie.
I'm sorry. Can I just jump in for a second? I just want to say that in no way did I ever intend to minimize these problems. And I want to say my position on decriminalization is not about my personal opinion of prostitution. I'm for decriminalization because I believe it enables violence against women to criminalize prostitution. I think it's actually an enabler to do this, and that's why I'm against it. So I'm not denying that it happens. And when I said that conservatives stacked with tragic stories, they did. Those are stories of murder, rape, coercion. I'm against all those things, and all those things still remain illegal. But I think decriminalization facilitates those, or sorry, criminalization facilitates those phenomena. And that's why I'm for decriminalizing.
Sorry, just a minute. Todd, we quote the police on our statement, and can you explain us, please, about trafficking in the island? The quote? You don't know? Can you tell?
It was about how many trafficking cases there have been in the last decade.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's, okay, well, again, it's a little bit off topic because I think really we're talking about exactly what Randall was talking about, is the decriminalization and how criminalizing causes more problems. But yes, the human trafficking aspect in Victoria is, there has never been a charge. There's never been anyone charged for trafficking. However, it's not that we don't know of situations where people are being trafficked interprovincially or throughout various provinces. But it's also very difficult without the cooperation of the people involved to prosecute. So it's out there, there's laws that are out there so that we can, when those situations come up, we have tools. But there's also a lot of overlap around that coercion, exploitation, assault, uttering threats, harassment, human trafficking. Human trafficking is a law that adds an aggravating factor onto some of the exploitation that already occurs.
I remembered what I wanted to say. We'll take 2 seconds, seriously. I'm Métis, and I would never go to an organization that does not support my decision to do what I need to do in order to take care of myself and my family. Just like I would never go to a pro-life organization if I were pregnant and I was unable or unwilling to carry that pregnancy through.
My name is Jason Anderson. I used to work at Piers Vancouver, also PACE. I was the first male to go through the program and then brought in to work the program as well. And I did some initial outreach out in Vancouver to bring the guys in. I want to say thank you very much for being a mom who's here. And I wish so much that my mom was a person like that just wishes that door was closed. And I'm also, and this is something else, I was here in 2007 with Cecilia Benoit, and I was at PACE, I think, at the time, and there was the other conference invited from New Zealand as well, looking at stigma. And I'm curious to find out whether or not the stigma in New Zealand towards those sex workers has decreased, because then we'll have some health disparities as well that have decreased, and I think that's the most important thing. Also, I'd like to comment that I was also an exploited youth, but I was brought back in at 33 from internet luring. And I also had a female pimp when I was 16 as well, on the streets of Calgary. Now, with decriminalization, I'm here for the main thing only, and that's for the youth of today. I would like to make sure that the decriminalization allows that presence of possibility where we're not pushing exploited youth further away. And I also think, I want to also value that I think you guys have done a wonderful job in separating the two today. Sex work and also the abuse of youth. Because sometimes those get so mixed and they get mixed together, and you guys have done a wonderful job in keeping them separate. But this still allows that opportunity to look at youth and to, for instance, for a brothel, red flags can be presented. This is what I dream of anyway, red flags being presented where then we can go to safely and trustingly to our officers and be able to report those things, or third-party reporting where they'll be listened to. And just to make sure that the youth aren't pushed further away. That's the biggest thing. And also, I also wanted to say thank God this time too that you're speaking of men. And it's a wonderful thing to hear, and trans and that whole mixture. I agree with community, personally, I agree with community. I still think though that there's a lot of difference between men and the experience of women, and I really hope that we can look at some research on what that may be for men and also men's health.
But we are all humans.
This young woman here has been, is there another person first?
There's a lineup.
Oh, a lineup. Oh, okay.
I just had a question around, I really enjoy the exploration of what decriminalization means in all its various forms in terms of being able to go to human rights tribunals and bring complaints. And one aspect that I haven't heard talked about a lot that I'm really curious about is what it means in terms of workers' compensation legislation. That if it's decriminalized, can sex workers then fall under workers' compensation so that if a workplace injury takes place, that they have access to health care, that if they're unable to work, that they can receive compensation, and how that might be, I don't know in New Zealand if they have that, or how it's, I don't know if we're at that point yet because decriminalization hasn't happened to have those discussions start taking place.
I think that I should quickly answer, has stigma decreased? You hear a lot of people say things like, now that it's all legal, and that this will be the body of people who are interested in working with sex workers, so it might be insurance brokers or people wanting to build a client base for whatever their business is. So in one respect you can say they recognise there is a new market, but they also are saying now that they're a part of, or allowed to be a part of, I want to get to know them too. So I guess that's one little indicator of a decrease in stigma. Still we have the bogey next door, people are afraid, and certainly the street-based sex worker is the scary, stigma-carrying symbol for some people, and there's lots to do in that respect. We don't have any anti-discrimination legislation that covers occupation. If I'm repeating myself, I'm sorry. So in terms of worker protection, if somebody has an accident at work, they're covered. They get accident compensation. That's a whole protection for the workforce. In terms of being an independent contractor, which is the nature of the relationship, generally that's called by the brothel operator, who will say, oh no, they're all independent contractors, and they will call it that way to avoid tax liability and workers' holiday pay and so on. And it also sometimes suits the sex worker. But if you're an independent contractor and you've got your business and you're paying your ACC levies, I think that gives you some kind of other entitlement, providing you're in the system. A lot of sex workers will be outside of the system in terms of paying tax, but you've got a year from starting out to pay your tax. So there's constraints.
Would it not be correct to say that there is a difference between decriminalization and legalization, right? So where decriminalization, which we're talking about today, is just about not making it a crime to aspects of sex work, which might be different than regulation, putting in place mechanisms for what it means to keep a body house, or how many people can you have in a building, what are the all the regulations around work. That's a whole, I think, other can of worms in a way, because there is also debates, I think, among sex workers who fear that that would create further intrusions into their work, that they don't necessarily want the kinds of regulations that might be put in place, that they want to determine for themselves their working conditions, right? So I think there's lots of, we can have another discussion on that.
Another panel.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say there's been a variety of things said here today in many different ways, and just as a personal perspective, I think a couple things. One, it's never so powerful than to hear from an individual what their best needs are. What are my needs in terms of my health? What are my needs in terms of my economic freedoms? What are my needs in terms of my power of choice, my rights to access safety and health care, and all kinds of choice and rights and responsibilities that come with that. And kind of piggybacking on the last question, we know that upholding the human rights of any individual enhances the human rights of any other individual in their community. So I wonder if you have any thoughts or comments on how decriminalization affects the human rights of everyone in the community, not just people who do sex work and people who engage in the sex work industry by being clients or participants.
Who'd like to take that one?
The answer is kind of in the question. I would say that it sort of goes back to the question about that unanswerable question of why this is such a moral stumbling block for so many people. And I think decriminalization is going to lead to shifting perceptions, which will ultimately be enhancing of human rights in a broader way. So it's one of those yucky legal things where with time change will come, but I think decriminalization, like the ways in which we've shifted definitions of spouse in Canada, shifts our perceptions of what it means to be a human with substantive equality in Canada.
Any more questions? Oh wait, you never got your chance.
Someone here and someone
And this.
Sure.
It's yours.
Thank you.
And on that, oh yeah.
Thank you for your comments. My team, Special Victims Unit, Victoria PD, have been trying so hard to break the silence around that. We're talking about advertising on escort agencies, websites, talking about putting ads on Backpage and the various areas, inviting workers in the sex trade to speak to us directly, not necessarily going through patrol or the 911, the comm center. When I hear, I mean, this is why I do this, is because of your experiences where you feel like you cannot ask for help, and I'm telling you, and it's been a long road for us to try and make the point that you will be honored as a human being first, that it's not about you being in the sex trade, that if you've been violated and you've been sexually assaulted, then that is the priority and that is the crime we'll investigate.
I think this could be the last question. What do you think? Then we'll let we don't have any more lineups, do we? Am I missing? What have we got? Maybe it's too soon to say that. All I know is.
I have somebody. This lady up here.
Okay.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Megan, and I hate public speaking, so my face is probably like the color of a tomato right now. But I just wanted to say, I was thinking earlier, you were saying on the topic of desperate sex workers and people who are on drugs. I was one of those people, and I want to make the differentiation between desperation is not the same thing as weakness. It's not. Because I was desperate and I was getting my next fix, but I was not weak. And what you said about being on the streets and having to take a couple shots of tequila and, smoke some pot and walk around, it's terrifying out there. I'm shaking right now. Yeah, desperation is not the same thing as weakness, and I think we need to give people credit. It takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of smarts to survive out there. So I just wanted to differentiate a little bit.
I just wanted to mention a few things that I was thinking about. It's not necessarily questions. On the issue of trafficking, I am a pro-decriminalization person. I come from Montreal. I've been working a decade frontline with various populations who do sex work, chosen or not, in various situations, when men, women, trans-identified folks, and even minors. And there's a book that I read called Sex at the Margins, Migration, Labor Markets, and the Rescue Industry by Laura Augustine. And it's a really amazing book about even nuancing how we interpret the documents that come through in the research. So I would for all of, I guess, all of us who are trying to counter what people say about trafficking and how that's really what's going on, and we like to turn a blind eye to it. I think Laura Augustine's work helps us take it over the binary of those who are poor and against, and helps us think about those arguments. And I'm speaking from the point of view of somebody who has sex workers are my friends, they're my lovers, they're my family. I have two members of my family, an uncle and a cousin, and an aunt who all died on the streets. So to me, this is personal as well as very political. So to answer why I'm here and how I think we can educate ourselves, that's my answer.
Thank you very much, everyone. We got one last question. I'm just afraid they're going to come and take the furniture away. So. And then we'll all be standing. Well, plus, after the last question, we'll also give the this fabulous panel a chance to say anything that they haven't said yet.
Yes. Hi. Hi. I just wanted to, first of all, I wanted to thank everybody for sharing their stories, because that's how I learn, and I just think it's so profound that you've both done what you've done today. I wanted to just comment on something Randall said, and that is getting in touch with politicians. Okay, I call I'm a politician. But I want to tell you a real quick story, and that's because the outreach that Piers did to me and Charlene Thornton-Joe resulted after a couple of months of our work together in getting our city council to write a letter to the Prime Minister and the Senate and the Parliament to support Piers. So you can do a lot when you contact politicians. And that is so incredibly important because, as Randall said, it's the loud voices that get heard. And we need to get louder and louder and louder on this particular thing. And I can't tell you how much of a privilege it's been to be involved in this story and to be in a position where, even though it's a tiny little thing, there was a step taken in order to show that our community supports not just this organization, but all of the people who work in this industry are Victorians. And my job is to try and make the quality of life better for everyone who is in my city, and that includes everyone who works in the sex trade.
Panelists, are there things you'd like to say, things you'd, one question that we never got to, which I'm very sad about, was just to, knowing how tough it is for people to get their heads around this, whether there's any thoughts you might have on something that, about the sex industry that people may not know that may help them think differently about it, But we don't have to do that question. Just tell me what you, any last thoughts from any of you?
I just wanted to thank you so much for putting this on, and every person that contributed to this day happening and all of you coming out. I just am so thankful, as well as the original people whose land we're visitors on. I forgot to do that. And especially my fellow sex workers who spoke up today. I'm showered in goosebumps with your honesty, your vulnerability, your courage. I'm blessed to be sisters with you and others in this audience. And the one good thing that has come out of all of this, Bill C-36 and all of these conversations, is me actually being introduced to you. Because as an indoor sex worker, we are incredibly isolated. There was more of a community on the street that one night that I went out than I have ever experienced in the 10 years that I've practiced as an indoor worker. So thank you, Stephen Harper and Peter McKay, for opening up those doors. Kudos to you.
Let's go down there.
I'm really thankful to have been part of this and hearing everyone's stories and perspectives. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not an expert and I'm always learning how to do it better. We have a city council that at least has an open mind on how to do this better. We have a police department to do that well. I'm not saying that we've always done it well or that we're even doing it perfectly today, but there's a lot of creative ways to, regardless of C-36 and the passing, there's discretion will always be focused on taking care of this community. And we know that by decriminalizing, that doesn't work towards that. So I'm optimistic around even just this conversation, this community, this turnout, and what's going to be in our future. Thanks.
I just want to thank sex workers who shared their stories with me and been very helpful me getting to where I'm at, and thank all of those sex workers and their parents who are here today. I have the privilege of being a member of Parliament, so I get to go cast a vote against this bill. But I just want to say one more thing. The Conservatives have worked very hard to rush this through and to limit the amount of opposition voices that can be heard. So there are nearly 100 New Democrats. They allowed 6 of us to speak at second reading, just 6. And they said, that's enough. We've heard enough from you. We're going to move on. I probably won't get the chance to speak again because we're trying to share it in our caucus. But they are really working hard to silence people on this issue while they rush it through. And I think it's important that people understand that. They have audited charities who disagree with them. They just admitted yesterday, I asked them in the House of Commons, they spied on 800 public meetings of people who are expressing opinions against them. This is a government that does not want to hear opposition voices, and so I call on all of you to speak up and let them know that's not the Canada that you want to live in.
I would like to thank Jody and Piers for putting this on, and I would also like to thank all of you for coming out and opening your minds to listening to the complexities of these issues. Over the past 20 years, I've had the fortunate and unfortunate experience of having sat on similar panels where they have been more open to a diversity of extreme opinions. And when that has happened, quite often they have disintegrated into bullying, to violence, to intimidation, and they've resulted in no dialogue. These issues that we were talking about here today are complex issues. They require dialogue. They require us to go home and talk to our friends, talk to our neighbors, talk to our coworkers, talk to our lovers, talk to our, talk. And if we continue to talk, then we can start sorting through the messiness and the complexity and not simplifying it to, oh, it's just a bunch of victims of trafficking doing horrible, immoral, and perverted things. We need to continue to have these engagements. So thank you.
Thank you, Jody and Piers. And it's always daunting to speak to such a huge country, knowing that we don't matter, we're at the bottom of the world. But if you look online and if you do hear things said about New Zealand in the context of decriminalisation, do poke around. And there's a lot of evidence there in terms of research which has been carried out on huge studies that will confirm that the occupational safety and health of sex workers is better under a decriminalised legislative environment. Not perfect, but better. And we're going to strive to make it safer for every sex worker everywhere. Good luck.
Sometimes I'm embarrassed to tell people that what I do for a living is create lawyers. But there are students in the room who come from UVic Law, and I just want to say to you, it's inspiring that this is what you've done with your Friday afternoon to self-educate, and that I get hopeful because people at law school go on to hold incredible power in the world. And if this is one of the things you care about, then there's hope for us.
I just want to echo the thanks everyone's already said to Jody for having me and to you all for being here. I guess I personally wish, I do think that it's the voices of sex workers who should really be up here, not me and not those of us who don't have that experience. And I actually, for about 10 years, stopped doing work around this issue and stopped talking about it until I heard from Indigenous sex workers that they didn't feel safe in these kind of environments, that they often were attacked or told that they were a victim or that they were actually at fault, that they caused more harm. So my hope is that, just as we've all been talking about, whether it's through law or through strength in relationships, that someday it isn't me up here. I would like that very much, because I do think as the people who've shared their experiences today, that should be where any issues having to do with sex work, any answers about increased safety or choices or anything should be determined by sex workers. So support your local sex worker.
Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Piers. Thanks, ABI. I always share those two organizations in my heart, of course. Thanks to you. It was a safety space, and that was my biggest fear all the time, because every time we try to talk about decriminalization, there's something wrong. So, and thanks for your courage. I really appreciate it, and I embrace you. Yes, just that was cool, and it gave me the strength to continue this activism, because it's a really strong one, because of the stigmatization. And thanks, Catherine. I think you're one of my model. I mentioned to you, anyway, in the past, but I think, yeah, you're fighting very hard for this. You were fighting very hard,
But it was Valerie Scott who mentored me.
yeah, Valerie Scott. But I think you're like an example also, Bedford and Valerie Scott, and anyway, they are like a model for us to continue, even if they throw rock on us. I think you give me like most of the women who are like fighting and give me the strength to fight back and continue your fight. So it's a lot of fight. I'm fighting. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I would just love to, I'd love to thank this panel. It's been great. I thought, right from the start, I thought, how do we get all those stars in the same room on a Friday afternoon? So it's been as good as I imagined it, and I'm very appreciative that Piers Victoria approached me about organizing and moderating, and there's a donation box for Piers, just if anyone would like to help out. Of course, thanks to Kathy Travis and Victoria Home Station for this lovely set, and thank you to this poor fellow who got tossed into this situation completely unaware and has been a very nice guy, getting all this crazy sound equipment worked out. And much thanks to John Carswell, who has always been a friend of Piers right back through the Victoria Idol days, and is here again doing on his own time doing a videotape of this event so that we'll have a permanent record, which is very exciting to have that. And thank you. You guys have been excellent. I am very glad that we did have some challengers, polite, respectful challengers, because really, this isn't a conversation that should be had just by the people who, the old preaching to the choir, you know, like it's comfortable when we're all on the same side of something and we're talking about it, but Canada has a lot to think about on this issue, and really the conversation needs to be broadened out to people who, I don't think people who are like fully on the opposition side, but because we're just, that conversation just is going to turn into a fight. But people who are wondering, well, I don't know what to think about this is pretty complicated. I really appreciate when people come down to an event on a Friday afternoon to try to understand that complex situation a little better. So thank you very much to all of you, and I hope we get to do this again. There's many questions that didn't get discussed yet. Thanks.